Well, raising kids to be independent, it's all part of parenting. Kids must learn how to do things on their own. But child protection agencies and lawmakers have made at least 2 Winnipeg moms second guess what were once obvious choices. Here to talk about this is Katarina Noose and Jackie Kendrick, along with clinical psychologist Dr. Sarah Sturkson. Thank you all so much for coming in this morning to chat about this topic. So let's start, Katarina, with what happened this past July. You decided to let your 7- and 3-year-old walk to the bakery by themselves half a block away. Tell us why you wanted them to do that.
Well, we needed some bread for lunch. My 7-year-old was excited to walk down to Tallgrass. We're a half a block from the bakery. We go there often, know many of the staff there. They know my kids. And so I said, yeah, I think that's okay. I gave her money. And then her 3-year-old brother decided he would like to tag along. And I thought about that. He's only 3. And I thought, well, if he's excited about that, the 7-year-old was excited to have him come along. I know him. I'm not concerned that he would run out into traffic. They don't have to cross any streets. So I decided to stand on the sidewalk and watch them walk the half block. So they left my site very briefly to go into the bakery, and then I watched them come back. Now, a month later, I got a visit from a CFS worker saying a concern had come in that my kids were not supervised. Now, I want to be clear, I don't take issue with getting a visit from CFS. I understand that they need to follow up on every concern that comes in. That is their job. What I do take issue with is that he told me that my kids shouldn't be out on their own until they're 12. I asked when, he said they shouldn't be doing that. And I said, when can they walk down to the bakery? And he said, not until they're 12. And I said, what about kids walking to school on their own or in groups, walking to a friend's house? Because many kids do, it's a reality. And he said, no, they shouldn't be doing that till they're 12 either. That is what I take issue with, and that is the focus of my petition. I also wrote some letters to the Department of Families and to Anchor, the CFS agency, and they reiterated that if kids under 12 appear to be unsupervised, they're required to be reported. Now, I feel like if that is, I looked up the Child and Family Services Act and found there is that age restriction. It appears to give some leeway for parental discretion. However, I've become aware that it is actually interpreted in a fairly rigid manner. And I feel that that is not in touch with reality, and it also really does our kids a disservice, because for healthy development, kids need opportunities for gradual independence. There's quite a bit of research out there that shows that for their social, emotional, physical, mental well-being and healthy development, kids need opportunities for self-directed play, outdoor play, healthy risk in their play, and these incremental bits of independence. By the time they're 12, they're almost teenagers. There's a lot of missed learning opportunities. And so I would like to see a change in that law to explicitly allow our kids these freedoms in order to honor their need for this independence, for us as parents to make that judgment and extend that trust to our kids when they show readiness, and also to free up CFS resources, because if that is explicitly allowed, then there is no basis for someone to make a call to CFS just because kids are not hovered over every minute of their day. And that way CFS could focus their resources on families and children that truly do need protection and support.
And that's why you wanted your children to have that opportunity, to take this learning opportunity, to feel that independence. And then, yes, you get that knock on your door from a CFS agent. Jackie, we know your story isn't that much different. Can you bring us up to speed on what happened to you several years ago?
Yeah, well, it would have been April 2016, I think. Same kind of thing. I got a knock at my door. I had no idea whatsoever. And it was an intake worker from CFS. Didn't understand what she was telling me at first, because all I heard was a well-being check. For what? I have no idea. She finally comes inside and we talked about it, and yeah, someone, whether or not it was a neighbor, someone walking by, I guess my kids were playing outside in my fenced-in backyard, and the front is chain link, so you can see in.
And how old were your kids?
At the time, my oldest was 10, 10 and 6.
Okay.
And my youngest would have been almost 2, but I don't believe she was outside. We usually didn't let her outside unless we were out there, so it probably was only the 2 older ones. If my youngest was out there, we were out there with her, but you can't CS.
But a neighbor had
Yeah.
reported that there was children playing outside unsupervised within their own backyard.
Yes.
And what was your reaction to this?
I was shocked. I didn't understand. I said, what do you mean they can't play in my backyard when I'm home? And same thing, they just kept repeating. Kids under 12 can't be left unsupervised.
And like Katerina, you understand that, Child and Family Services, they have to follow up on these reports. Yes. But for you and Katerina, it's that this was even a phone call to begin with. So let's bring in Dr. Dirksen, because we're at a point now where we want our kids to feel the independence. We want to foster that when they're young, but we also have to make sure we're supervising them. And then we have the other end of the spectrum, which would be a term called helicopter parenting.
Right.
Where is the pendulum today?
Oh, it's difficult. It is moving more and more towards being anxious about our children. And in some ways, just to kind of, I really understand the concerns, and I think it's really sad that our society has gotten to this point where we can't let our children be more independent in this way. There is good things about taking more precautions with your children, of course. Accidental death is the #1 cause of death for children under 19, and that's been decreasing since the 1980s, and even since 2002 has decreased about 30%, at least in America. I don't know about Canada. And so some of these precautions that we're taking are having real effects, real positive effects. And it is important to say that people need to report concerns that they see out there. Even as a child psychologist, I'm not permitted to assess somebody's risk for, if I see something that is alarming, I'm not allowed to assess whether somebody's doing this properly. It's up to CFS to do that. And so that's a reality that we all need to kind of be aware of and respect. But I think that there is this other side where all of this anxiety can be projected and passed on to our children, and that's unfortunate. Our children look to us as a reference point for anxiety, and especially if a person is becoming intrusive. So one study that I like is children were playing at a table trying to solve a problem, and there were parents kind of watching them, and if the parents waited until the child asked for help, the children were fine. But if the parents were kind of going in because they were anxious and they're like, I need to help my child solve this problem, kind of being intrusive in that way, children became more anxious. So that for me is a bit of a marker on the difference between kind of helping your child when they're asking for help and becoming more of a, what we would maybe call a helicopter parent, and becoming somewhat intrusive and passing along that anxiety to them.
So we want to be able to empower our children. And one way that, Katerina, you've seen this happen is in the state of Utah. They passed a free-range parenting law, and this is where you're at today. You have a petition going, and you're trying to lobby our government to consider allowing more freedoms. Can you tell us a little bit about this petition?
Yeah, the petition, excuse me, came out of this experience, and I thought I would really like to see this change that explicitly allows our kids these freedoms, because as we know, getting a visit from CFS does cause us anxiety and causes our children anxiety. I want to be clear too that free-range parenting does not mean paying less attention to our kids or just letting them run free. It actually means being more attentive to them, to their cues of readiness, and to be able to extend those freedoms to them when we think they are ready. So that is what I would like to see, a change in that law that explicitly allows that, so that as parents we can make these calls and that our kids can have these freedoms.
It's interesting because not even a generation ago parents could make these decisions, and it was very normal to let your child run around the block to go visit a friend. So Dr. Dirksen, for parents right now who are trying to figure out what should we do, how do we assess inherent risk versus perceived risk to figure out what our children are capable of doing so we can properly set them up to be independent adolescents?
I remember one time hearing a parent talking about wanting to give their child independence and do these things, and they were like, well, at first I watched from behind a bush to make sure that they were okay when they were doing this thing, but then I wanted to give them more independence, so then I went into the backyard or something like that, and I challenged them, and I was like, the child didn't know you were there. So I don't see the difference between those two scenarios other than the fact that you're increasing the risk for your child. So for a child, we're not necessarily looking for an increased risk. What we're looking for is an increased challenge, an increased perceived independence. And so that would be the balance that I would be looking to give parents today, would be try to give your children a perceived perception that they're becoming more independent, that they're becoming more able to face the challenges of life. And that doesn't always mean that we have to actually put their lives in greater risk in these situations. decisions.
So assessing what your child is capable of, being allowed as a parent to make these decisions and make those decisions, more importantly, Jackie, without the judgment.
Exactly.
Because that's something that you felt.
Yes, yes. It was, when it comes to social media, as soon as, it got out there, I stayed off. Like, I would not read any of the comments, and of course, eventually you do. And the judgment of what other people say is,
It's traumatizing.
Yeah, it is.
To
it's
a certain
like
degree for you.
as if people think that that's what I'm doing to my children, when all I want them to do is, learn how to handle some things and know that mom's always there, but you also need to try and figure things out for yourself.
Well, it's clear you're very loving parents, and this is a debate that will continue. We thank you all so much for coming in to have this discussion with us.
Thank you.